Hello, dear listeners. It is I, Nicole Solomon, co-host of the Celluloid Mirror, here to tell you about some audio issues you are likely to hear in the episode you are about to listen to. You will probably hear a shift in the quality of my audio in the last 30 minutes of this episode due to some technical difficulties. So just a heads up and apologies on that. And thank you so much for tuning into this final episode of season 1 of the Celluloid Mirror. Enjoy the show and see you next season.
I mean, what do you think? You think they stand a chance? Well, you're on their side, aren't you? Who are you betting on,
Magic mirror on the wall. Who is the fairest one of all?
Look at these lies.
One shall stand, one shall fall.
Even if one of them survives.
The only way to stop him is to make another movie.
Welcome to the Celluloid Mirror, a film discussion podcast presented by 4 Mile Circus, a media services company based in Brooklyn that produces original films, videos, podcasts, and more. On each episode of the Celluloid Mirror, we pair 2 very different films to see what they reflect about each other and the audience watching. I am one of your hosts. I am Nicole Solomon.
And I am the other one of your hosts, Sean Mannion. On today's episode, we have a very special guest, Ashlee Blackwell. Hello, Ashlee.
Hi. Hello. How you doing, you guys?
Hi, Ashlee.
And Ashlee is the creator of the online scholarship Graveyard Shift Sisters, resource highlighting the history of Black women in the horror genre, and is one of the writers and producers of the Shudder original documentary Horror Noire, A History of Black Horror. She's currently an adjunct professor of film studies. And on today's episode, we're going to be discussing the 1991 teen comedy Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead, and the 2019 surrealistic drama Knives and Skin. Spooky. Wait, no, we're not doing horror. We're doing teen comedies, which is because they're just so much fun. First, we're going to give a quick synopsis of each film and outline the primary connections we see between them, and then we're going to share our own reactions before diving into analysis of some of the shared themes. Does that sound good, everybody?
Amazing.
Sounds like a good plan.
Wow.
Something to do on a Saturday. Saturday nights are for talking about teen comedies. So let's start with let's chronologically. How about I tell you a little bit about Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead?
Go for it.
That sounds great. So Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead is a teen comedy. It's about a family, just a warm, loving, connected family where the mom just decides, screw it, I'm going to Australia for 2 months. And all her kids are terrible. They don't clean up after themselves. They don't listen to her. They're kind of just mean to each other, and they are without direction. And they think that they're just going to have a great time for these 2 months that mom is away. And then the babysitter shows up, who seems like just a sweet old lady. And they think, we're going to get past it with this old lady. This is terrible that we got a babysitter, but she just seems nice. But really, she's some sort of monster. And truly just horrifying, and while the kids do deserve more than a little bit of the discipline that she tries to leverage, she's still a little bit harsh about it. And then she dies, which is just given away in the title, because it is Don't Tell Mom that the Babysitter is Dead. But if mom sees the movie, she's gonna know. So I don't know where that. What they expected with that. So the babysitter dies, and the kids run out of money after not too long, and mom's Mom's still away. What are they going to do? Well, the big sister, played by Christina Applegate, has to get out there and get a job. And she tries a couple things. They're not making much, and then she tries to apply for a job at this fashion company. It's like a functional fashion thing, I think.
Uniforms.
And uniforms. And she accidentally gets an assistant job when she wasn't really there for the assistant job. I think she was there for the
she was there for like a basic admin job, and then she got promoted to executive.
Receptionist.
Yeah, she's like an executive assistant suddenly over a very unpleasant receptionist. And things progress. She gets involved in the late 80s, early 90s sexist corporate world, and gains some responsibility, becomes also puts off some stuff on other people, delegating, and starts to make some money, starts to steal some money, petty cash, so that her family can keep going, because the kids aren't quite responsible yet. But over the course of the movie, they all learn a little bit about responsibility. Her sort of stoner heavy metal brother learns to be a little bit more responsible, learns a little bit more about cooking. And they all find themselves in a way culminating in a large event at the end, a fashion show at the end, where Christina is actually saving the company. And it's finally revealed, because Mom shows back up, it's finally revealed that she is in fact only 17, as I recall, and that she really shouldn't be working the way she was working. And but then everything kind of works out in the end, because it's a comedy. And that is my sort of fumbling, not fully accurate Don't Tell Mom, the Babysitter.
It was close.
I'm pretty sure I was like 70, 73%.
No, that was like a good 95% correct, and then 5% errors. But, that's also because I literally just rewatched this. It would not be that sharp in my mind.
Yeah. It's been
months and months.
So you want to tell us about Knives and Skin?
Since you rewatched it. Yes, I would love to tell you.
Yes, but I've also seen it like a dozen times.
So me trying to, make excuses for you is just foolhardy.
Never make excuses for me. I don't deserve it.
Fair enough. Rules to live by. So Knives and Skin is often referred to as a thriller, but because it has a lot in common with a thriller, it is not, I would not consider it a comedy. That's why I came up with surrealistic drama. I'm like, that's kind of...
that's more accurate. So I don't know why it's put in, like, it's not, people don't call it horror, but I guess it has those elements, I suppose. I don't know.
It has this time, well, we'll get into it later, but I think it's like definitely horror adjacent. I don't think it would be wrong to include it potentially even in a horror lineup, depending on what the kind of umbrella was, because it has a lot in common, but it's definitely not a straight genre movie of any sort. Mm-hmm. It's not really horror. It's not really thriller. It's not really suspense at all.
It is kind of a comedy though, but in that sort of very uncomfortable way.
Yeah, like in the way you said, it reminded you of Greener Grass.
Exactly. But less out there than Green.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that. But so what sets the whole movie in motion is there's a high school girl named Carolyn Harper. She's out on a date with this jerky guy named Andy. They set up this kind of surrealistic or perhaps magical realism elements right off at the very beginning of the movie. Various objects will glow, things like that happen that suggest perhaps there's something supernatural going on. Although as the film progresses, it becomes clear, at least in my reading, that it's not that there's literally something supernatural going on. It's more kind of a metaphorical visual manifestation of like the emotional realities of the characters is what I would say. So it's an odd movie to begin with. And, it starts, they're on a date. there's tension going on. It's really, I love the dialogue in this movie. I've got a lot of things to say about this movie, but they have this like, you know, somewhat combative interchange that ends with Carolyn deciding she doesn't want to hook up with Andy. And Andy's basically like, well, fuck you then, and kind of pushes her and leaves her out in this like deserted kind of forest area where you get the sense kids go park or whatever. And so she's there. She doesn't have her glasses. She has left her glasses in Andy's car. She can't really see. She's injured to some degree. She potentially has a heart condition and may have suffered from heart failure. And it's a little unclear at first what happens to her, but she's stranded out in the woods and back in her town, which is, I believe, like a suburb of Chicago specifically, although I don't think they name that in the movie, but it's like a Midwestern suburb of a city. Everyone in her town is dealing with her disappearance. Her mom is dealing with her disappearance. The kids at school are, their parents and all of their different pretty complicated interconnections are all coping with this mystery and that they don't know what happened to her for a long time. There's a level of, you know, searching going on, trying to find her, but that's not really what animates the film. It's not really about the search to find Carolyn. It's about all the people Carolyn left behind and what's going on with them and all the different sorts of pain they're in. I think the tagline was like, Carolyn is missing, everyone else is lost, is what it says on the poster. And that's a pretty accurate description of what you're going to get. And you can see our patrons can see, nobody else gets to see, but my wackadoo, like Zodiac killer looking notes of me trying to keep track of people's names and their different complicated intertwined relationships and things like that. So I think for me to try to recap all of that would be absolutely a fool's errand, and I'm not going to do it. I will say, everyone who listens to this show, I think, knows this show is rife with spoilers. If you don't want to know what happens in Knives and Skin, great, go watch it. I am glad that the first time I saw it, I went in knowing very little. I think that's a great way to see it. That said, I also think if you know the plot, it's not really going to ruin it for you at all, because it's not really about the plot. You know, eventually it became clear, at least to me, although I think different people may read it differently, that Carolyn's dead. We're cutting back and forth between her in the forest occasionally, and then all the people in the town. And at a certain point, it becomes clear, to me at least, that they're searching for a girl who's dead. They're not going to find her alive. It's just a matter of when they're going to find her and who's going to find her, not what happened to her. And, you know, and then we follow this relationship drama until the end, basically, where a mother and daughter, not related to Carolyn, find her body in a somewhat traumatic way that's related to the emotional revelations between them as well. And a lot of characters get a little bit of closure. I think there are plot lines with so many different characters in this, so many different kids at the school who each have their own little arcs about what they're dealing with their peers as well as their parents. And I guess I'll leave it there because we'll talk about all those specifics as it goes on. But that's Knives and Skin. Tonally very different from Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead. They do both have comedic elements and, you know, are out there in some ways. But Sean, do you want to talk about what we saw as being the connections between Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead and Knives and Skin besides teens?
That seems off topic for the show. They're both films about teenagers coming of age in the absence of parental guidance, and catalyzed. That's catalyzed in case of both of these films by an unexpected and obfuscated death. So we'll come back and
I just was gonna really quickly say, because I don't think I touched on it in my synopsis, most of the parents in Knives and Skin are not really parenting their kids very well. Some of the parents,
what are you talking about? This is excellent.
Some of the children in Knives and Skin are arguably parenting their parents in some cases. But I would say, like, Don't Tell Mom, the mom's in Australia. Knives and Skin, the moms are there, but they're not there. So that's where that.
Hey, the dads aren't there either.
No, that's extremely true.
Dads are doing their part.
But nobody cares about telling dad if the babysitter's dead or not, because dad's apparently been out of the picture for a long time. But anyway, we have to do capitalism, right? We have
We have to do a capitalism. So let's take a break for a capitalism. We'll come back. We'll talk about our personal reactions to the films and all the other stuff that we usually do when we do the show.
It'll be so
amazing.
great.
All right.
Bye.
We'll be right back.
Are we back?
Are we back? Do we need to come back from that? Can we come back from that? I don't think so.
I don't know. Thank you, Ashlee, though. Thank you for that.
No problem.
It was amazing. All right. So
now it's the time, I think,
where we talk about our reactions to the films.
Yeah, where the hosts and the guest share all our reactions. Who would like to go first? I can react, but so can both of you.
Ashlee, would you like to tell us about the first time you saw these films and what you think about these films?
Absolutely. Don't Tell Mom is kind of a blur because, like, almost everyone in my age demographic has said, okay, I think I first saw it on HBO. Like, everyone's frame of reference is somewhere on cable, and then they played it a whole lot, and you just watched it because it was kind of one of those cool movies. You recognize Kelly Bundy, and maybe the girl from Halloween, and maybe David Duchovny because you were deep in an X-Files obsession like I was. So it was the movie I watched over and over again. Also, because this was the time before you didn't have to have a job, you didn't have to worry about bills. You could just sit around and squander your parents' or your guardians' cable profits all the time. So that's what I did, and I watched it a lot, and I really enjoyed it. But I think I don't even know in retrospect how I could kind of contextualize it for even today and why I was drawn to it so much. Maybe because I think I just kind of liked the idea of this kind of forced independence. I don't know. Maybe that's what it was. Maybe because it was one of those kind of like seamless kind of arcs that kind of like, it was kind of the film. It had a nice kind of 3-act structure, and it had that inciting incident where the babysitter's dead, and then she has to light a fire under her ass in order to, I don't want my mom to come home. And I really am trying to, like, I'm transitioning out of high school. I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. And so I'd rather take the less easier road and not have my mom breathe down my neck all summer and kind of enjoy myself. But even if enjoying myself means I have to find my own independence and still be kind of tied down to, paying the bills of the house and taking care. Yo, that makes me think, like, why is she paying? Did her mom, her mom goes away. I want to say something is really hilarious that I didn't even think about that someone said on Twitter when they had maybe they had watched it the first time or maybe a few times as an adult, but like one of their stray observations was, yo, that mom really said, fuck them kids. And I was just like, that's so true. I don't know. I never even thought about that, because my next thought was, wait a minute, why is she paying the bills? Like, if I'm leaving my 5 children away, I would think that I would at least pay the bills for the next 2-3 months that I'm gone, or however long she was gone for the whole summer. Like,
if I remember right.
Sorry.
If I remember right, she leaves money and then they run out of that money. Really quick, because she left money with the babysitter.
She left money
right?
with the babysitter. She left money in an envelope. The kids take the envelope. The babysitter has already taken apparently the however much cash that was out of the envelope and had it on her person, which is why the people at the mortuary where they dump her body,
the adorable mortuary guys.
Yeah, the adorable mortuary guys steal that money that the mom left off of a dead woman, which is why then they just bury her without ever reporting it or anything like that.
Right.
Because they want to keep the thousands of dollars. But I do think it's kind of weird that she left all that money with the babysitter rather than just prepaying the bills and leaving a smaller amount of money for food and incidentals.
That's what I thought it was for originally. I thought she gave her the envelope for just spending money. I thought that's what it was.
Gotcha.
That would make more sense. It was a little unclear.
Yeah, definitely.
In the film. But yeah, so you continue.
But no, it's a national treasure for me. Gosh, I love that movie so much. It's still quotable. It was a movie me and my mom really liked watching. My mom loved that movie. She I don't know how to describe it. She used to say Kenny's lines, because just to make all of us in the house laugh. But Knives and Skin. So I first saw that, interestingly enough, I think I have mentioned this before, but I love recounting this. I don't know why I like talking about days where I'm not feeling so great, but it's interesting because my mood matched the kind of emotional roller coaster that was Knives and Skin when I first saw it. I first saw it at, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the film festival's name. It's the one in New Orleans. But I saw it at a film festival, and that afternoon I just wasn't feeling that great. I don't know. I was there, with people, but I didn't travel with anyone. So I was virtually feeling really alone and isolated. And so I see a movie that kind of gives you off that kind of energy of these, especially these particular characters, especially their insular lives, more or less. That same level and energy of isolation. And so I just wasn't I just was emotionally kind of just drained and dealing with deep drowning in grief myself, because I had just lost my mother. This is less than a year of her passing. And so I'm watching this woman kind of unravel from losing her mother. And even though there are things that she does in the film that I don't particularly, I wouldn't do and don't identify with the emotion, I 100% was on board with her. So by the end of the film, where she's really having this really kind of ugly but honest moment with three of her students in her daughter's bedroom after she's seen that she had passed away, she starts crying, and then I start crying, and I'm trying to trying to make sure that no one can see me kind of just completely losing my shit in the theater, even though it's dark and I can't, and I would have loved to have stayed for the Q&A afterwards, because Ariane Roach was there, the young woman who plays Charlotte. I wanted to see all that, but I just couldn't do it. When those credits rolled, I was like, I have to get out of here, because I'm losing my mind right now, because this movie just kind of hit a nerve, so it's a tender one too, and I felt like my skin was ripped off of my body, because I felt really vulnerable and really bare in that moment. And I think that's one of the reasons why I really, really love the film. And then going back and watching it numerous times, I was able to even see a lot more of, again, a lot of the intricate, the different plots, because all different characters are going. It's an ensemble cast. There's so many things going on in different ways. And I'm kind of picking apart all of the things that I feel like are, in a way, kind of revolutionary. I think things a lot of people kind of didn't overlook, and I guess we'll get into that as we kind of talk about these two films. But those are kind of my two initial reactions to both of those films.
Yeah, absolutely. Sean, do you want to go, or should I talk? Or
sure, I can go. I had a similar experience with Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead. It wasn't quite like a whole family loved the movie sort of thing, but it was one of those movies that, it was on cable a lot. And I don't remember. I think I saw it the first couple times I saw it. I think it was on Comedy Central or something like that. So it was probably an edited version, and I probably picked it up somewhere in the middle. But I watched it a bunch of times. We watched it again recently. I always enjoyed it. It's a fun concept, dead babysitters. Who doesn't love that? I didn't have a whole lot of context for I knew Christina Applegate was in Married with Children, but we didn't really watch Married with Children. So I was like, oh yeah, she's in that other thing. So actually for me, Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead was my Christina Applegate context. I was just like, all right, she's from Don't Tell Mom. I like seeing her and stuff. I still like seeing her and stuff. She's in that show with Linda Cardellini that's really fun, who I also love, Linda Cardellini. But I think, I don't know exactly what I enjoyed. I think it was just that sort of, because that was a genre on its own almost in the 90s, was kids on their own, for I think reasons that we can talk about in a bit. But so those movies, kid, it's always kind of fun. Like, oh yeah, what would we do if we were on our own? And this one kind of takes it in this interesting like way in which they take responsibility, while not really taking responsibility. And I kept forgetting, but I know one of the reasons that I probably connected with it was I always recognized the brother, because the brother is the main kid in Adventures in Babysitting.
It's just the babysitting movie, guys.
It's the babysitting thing, and I love Adventures in Babysitting. So I think I was like, who is that guy? Who is that guy? I love that guy. What do I know him from? And then I would remember every once in a while it's Adventures in Babysitting. But
Keith Coogan, right?
Yeah, it is.
I think that's his name. Yeah. Yeah, and just I think I probably also always enjoyed the arc of him like learning to cook, and that being like this thing that he goes from being like to like, oh, I love cooking. This is amazing. Look what I've done. So I think I was just kind of enjoyed that part of it. Still enjoy that part of it. Knives and Skin, I watched on Tuesday. It has been on my list of like movies to watch for like, when did it come out? 2 years ago? Like, I think I first heard about it like a year or two ago. And I was like, oh, that sounds kind of, I don't even think I knew much about the plot. I was just like, everybody keeps saying this is good. It's supposed to be something, somebody dies or goes missing, suburban town thing. And it's supposed to be kind of weird. And then I watched it, and it was, I will say that it was one of those movies where I'm like, I am not in the right mood or headspace for this movie right now, because I recognize that this is a good movie, and that if I was in the right headspace, I would love this movie. But as it is, I was like, okay, I get what they're doing with this movie, and I like what they're doing with this movie, but I wasn't in love with the movie like I would have been in a different mood, because it's exactly the sort of thing that I do enjoy, which is where they just do whatever in order to convey, do whatever they need to do to convey the emotional state and share the emotional state of the characters, which is sometimes super muted and sometimes just bizarre. I think, which is all stuff I really enjoy. And it was definitely reminding me of other things that I very much enjoy. Like, as Nicole, I think, mentioned earlier, I'd said to her that it reminded me of Greener Grass, which I think came out the same year. Like, while Greener Grass is a little bit more absurd, they have almost the same tone as far as performance. And so, actually, Greener Grass is significantly more absurd, but they have that same tone, which is sort of seems to be something that might be catching on a little bit, because it's also that new movie Barb and Star, Go to Vista Del Mar. It's not quite at the same like performance, like weird performance, but it's very, very close. And it seems to be maybe something that is getting some traction, which will be interesting, because I don't know, some variety is always nice. So I that is my experience of Knives and Skin. Nicole, do you want to tell us how you feel about things and stuff?
I do. Don't Tell Mom, I saw, I think, on VHS. I don't remember watching it on cable a lot. Maybe we didn't have cable then. We sometimes had cable, often did not. But I saw it like in the 90s. It didn't leave a huge impression on me beyond like the advertising blitz that I remember when it came out. Because before I even saw the movie, I kind of felt like I had, like, I remember the ads. I remember the poster. I remember like the dishes are done, man, was like, and I did watch Married with Children. So I was like, oh, Christine Applegate from Married with Children. Kelly Bundy is now in this movie. And at some point I saw it. It didn't leave a huge impression on me at the time. And I didn't actually revisit it until, as we were chatting about earlier, a few months ago, I rewatched it and enjoyed it a lot. Enjoyed Christine Applegate's performance a lot, enjoyed Keith Coogan's a lot, enjoyed the dynamic between them as they kind of turn from a bickering bickering siblings to a more responsible, almost like a married couple, of sorts, where they're still bickering, but they're both a lot more responsible, and they're bickering about like responsibility as opposed to bickering about how neither of them wants to take any. I think the arc with the two of them and their relationship is really nicely done. And I also, when I was watching it, I would occasionally pause it and be like, yep, 12 minutes in, babysitter's dead. Yep, like 30 minutes in, she's got the job. Like, it is a well-structured movie that kind of like moves along, is very entertaining. The stakes are clear. The characters all have a journey. And I enjoy that film. Knives and Skin I saw with Ashlee for the first time at IFC. I think it was the third time you'd seen it, think so, maybe, yeah. Ashlee? Yeah, and Ashlee had raved to me about it and was like, it is going to play at IFC. We should go. And I'm like, that sounds great. And it was like an 11 a.m. showing or something like that. It was like not even in the afternoon matinee. And we met up there and went and saw it. And I don't think I knew very much about it going in. I was very taken by it. It's a very strange experience to watch for the first time. And then I remember we left in the before times you could do such things. We went and had lunch and sat and talked for a few hours about the movie in person, not over Zoom. And, I thought it was very good. I thought Jennifer Reeder, the director and writer, had a unique voice. And it was kind of my jam. I liked it a lot. I didn't watch it again until very recently for this podcast. I'd thought about it because it's been on Hulu, but it's also like not a super light movie that I'm like just going to put on, So it had been on my watch list. I'm like, oh, I should rewatch Knives and Skin. So I was actually really happy to have the opportunity to for this. And I liked it a lot more. I liked it a lot the first time. I gave it like 4 stars on Letterboxd or whatever. But like this time, it just hit me a lot harder. I think for a few reasons, one being like a lot's happened over the last year. Like I was in a different emotional state watching it this time. And like specifically, a friend of mine died about like 2 weeks ago, who I spent a lot of time with when I was the age of like these high school characters in the film. And it took me a while to figure out that, but like it made me cry this time. I had to like just go sit down for a while afterwards. And Sean, not this Sean, but my husband, Sean, is like, are you okay? And I'm like, I don't know. I just feel really like heavy and fucked up right now. And eventually I was like, oh, I think maybe this is part of why this hit me so hard, but also just all the loss of the past year, like all the, it's a lot has happened, but yeah, this time it really emotionally affected me. And because I knew what was going to happen, and I didn't have to deal with kind of the initial disorientation of watching a movie that is not meeting your expectations of what you're used to when you go in to see a film. Since I already knew that, I didn't have to despite my, ridiculous notes here, I didn't have to as much keep track of the characters. I didn't have to worry about how it was going to turn out or the plot. I knew everything that was going to happen. And instead I could just focus on how it happened and really appreciate just the vision of this film and, the cinematography, the art direction, the score, obviously the haunting choral arrangements of 80s pop songs that many people have focused on that are just even more emotionally intense for me this time around. And how despite the kind of somewhat heightened performances that that Sean was pointing to, and, the surrealistic or magical realism or whatever you want to call it, those aren't the same things. And I don't know exactly what it makes sense to call this, but it's something. Sure. Magical surreal. Sure. Works for me. The magical surrealism. Once you kind of get all that, that's what you're in for. It's just a lot less disorienting on rewatch and a lot easier to just kind of appreciate all the textures and nuances of the story. And the mother, Carolyn's mother, not the best mother in the world. Not everything she does is super relatable, but her grief was so powerful this time for me. And just the grief of everybody and the very serious way that Jennifer Reeder treats, these people's struggles. Like, it's not judgmental, even of the parents who are behaving badly. It's just very empathetic, I think. It is very uncomfortable.
Extremely.
At a lot of times. But if you're expecting that, it's less jarring. And so I would less be like, oh, what's happening with these two girls in the bathroom? Like, what are they pulling out of where? That's going to happen. So instead, I at least was more connected to like, what's this about, rather than what's happening. So yeah, I'm a big fan of this movie. I want to watch it again. I think it's really good. And next we'll talk about critics. I think a lot of critics did not really pick up on what this movie was about, which is disappointing. But I'm hoping that with time, it will just gain a bigger audience. I know Criterion Channel is streaming some of Jennifer Reeder's shorts right now. So like, hopefully she will continue to gain interest as a filmmaker. Cause I think she's got, and I agree that like, there are points where I was like, this is kind of like revolutionary. This is very like, and it's that nice feeling. You're like, oh, like the world just opened up a little bit, I feel like, through the honesty of this film. But so let's talk about, that was our initial reactions to these films and a little bit of our journeys with them. But other people had reactions to these films too, didn't they, Sean? Like critics and things.
They did on the Rotten Tomatoes.
What did they say there?
Knives and Skin is rated a 69% fresh by critics and a 32% fresh by audiences. And Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead is rated 35% fresh with critics and 57% fresh with audiences. So they just kind of like switch that around.
Yeah. It kind of makes sense to me. Like 69%, I think, is super low for this film from critics, but I think it speaks to just how polarizing it is and what an unusual film it is.
Yeah.
I think the Don't Tell Mom, I think critics are a little better now than they were in the 90s with not just being condescending towards certain sorts of films. I feel like this is the sort of film that the 90s critics would be like, this is trash. This is a dumb teen comedy or whatever. Whereas now, sometimes you're more likely to get critics who are like, okay, it's a teen comedy. Let's review it as a teen comedy, as opposed to deciding teen comedies are bad unless it's like maybe John Hughes.
You're very spot on about that. I've been, for the audience, I've been teaching a class on teen films for the spring semester at my university. And that's true. What I've been kind of like, one of the things I've been kind of like telling them as far as like these lectures and like the discussions that we're having is that like films targeted towards teenagers or catered towards teenagers weren't seen as, again, as that like high class, low class kind of a thing, or they're seen as like, oh, we'll just give teenagers like popcorn fare. They're like movies that they're not giving them movies to quote unquote think or to give them any kind of serious merit. They're just there because it's something that Hollywood can make a lot of money off of, because teens have been a target audience since the kind of inception of what we conceptualize as a teen film. And Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead kind of falls into that category. It's like I have in my notes for next week, because I'm having my students watch this next week, is that it was a box office failure and it was critically panned. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about why, or maybe why that is, and then kind of like when we watch it, like have them kind of like maybe unpack that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that my impression was not, because I was just like, I think this is kind of how it is. So thank you for validating my impression. But yeah, and I think like it makes sense that Don't Tell Mom is 57% fresh with audiences, because it kind of what you see is what you get. And also like, it's a teen comedy. So some audiences are going to be like, some people are just going to be like, this is dumb just based on the name. Honestly, some people are just going to hate the movie because it's called Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead, which interestingly, I learned preparing for this contest, this podcast. I'm not aware of this being a contest, but if I'm going to win something.
It is a contest and you're losing.
Of course.
Ashlee is, of course, winning.
Well, that's fair. That's fair. And don't get too excited, Ashlee, because you don't know what you're winning yet. And I have a feeling it's not going to be that great. But what was I saying?
You did a thing to prep for the podcast.
Oh yeah, the Don't Tell Mom the original title was The Real World, and it got changed because the MTV show was coming out.
I don't know if I like that title better. I could see it being a better title to sell, but I don't know if I like that title any better. Don't Tell Mom This Babysitter's Dead is so descriptive and fun. And it lends itself to that great poster. Because I also remember the poster as a kid. It was always in the back of comic books. There was the feet in the foreground and then all the kids. And it was just like, this is a great poster. I was curious about the movie because of the poster. I mean, I didn't see it for a while after, but it's still.
Yeah, I guess it's like a matter of where you want to put the focus, and Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead is like focus on wacky babysitter death, whereas the real world is like focus on the kids being forced into the real world, which is what the bulk of the runtime of the movie is about. The babysitter death actually, at the very end, I was like, oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Babysitter's over in the morning. Like, that's actually pretty fucked up that they just dumped her. Like, that's like without reporting it. And it's like, she doesn't have any family. It's fine. She can like be buried in a grave that says nice old lady on it. And I mean, she
wasn't, but
she wasn't. And I will say, like, the kids are a little justified in that I almost wish she had been an even worse babysitter. Cause at first I was like, yeah, she's mean, but I'm like, oh, hell no. Then she's trying to make, Melissa, I think her name is, wear like that pink dress. And I'm like, oh, this is like some gender coercion shit at this point. That's not cool. And calling, what's his name's girlfriend a trollop.
Yeah.
He called that like little girl a trollop. That's not okay.
I forget his name. Jeez. Oh, man.
What are my notes? Okay,
Zach.
so it's like,
sorry.
Zach. There you
Zach's girlfriend, Cynthia, I think her name was.
Right. Well, I think it would be interesting to see, there's no way to do this, but it would be interesting to see if the reviews would have been different if the title was different, because I wonder if they would have been. Because I wonder if critics would have gone in to the real world, taking it with a little bit more like, yeah, this is about the kids facing the real world. Instead, like, oh shit, I gotta watch Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead.
I feel like they were embarrassed by the title. And it pisses me off, honestly.
Yeah, because I like the title. It's a long title. It's too long, but I love it.
So back in the day, Ebert gave it 2 stars, which is not terrible. He didn't give it like 1 star. He gave it 2 stars. And the quote that I pulled from his review that I thought was interesting is, once the babysitter dies and her body is deposited anonymously on the steps of a funeral home, the movie is free to reveal its real purpose. This is a consumerist escapist fantasy for teenage girls. Sue Ellen's life is turned into an article from Cosmo crossed with a photo spread from Glamour, which honestly makes me think Ebert just doesn't read women's fashion magazines at all, because it doesn't really make sense. Which is fine. Ebert didn't have to, but he goes on to say, the most remarkable transition comes from the pothead brother who throws his dope-addled friends out of the house, watches a few episodes of Julia Child, cuts his hair, cooks the canapes, and announces that he plans to become an executive chef. I described this movie as an escapist fantasy for teenagers. Maybe it creates a fantasy their parents would find even more delightful. I don't know that I agree with Ebert that it's any more of an escapist consumer fantasy than like any other mainstream movie aimed at teenagers. I think it's more about, I mean, maybe this is me looking at it now, but I feel like it's more about their growth than about like, look at the cool stuff they bought. Like, they don't buy that. They buy like frozen pizza. They buy the entertainment system and have a fight about it. But it's not like Sue Ellen's out like spending petty cash on like tons of clothes or something like that.
It's like, because also, I guess, let me see if I can unpack this. I don't know if I will be able to, but because I mean, of course, Walter is going to buy a home entertainment center. He's what, 7? Like, if I was 7 years old and got a wad of cash, I'm going to buy a home entertainment center. It's not like you're the kid. It's really kids being kids. And also, it's kind of like, it's kind of, I don't know if the word is necessarily unfair to call it an escapist fantasy, because unfortunately, this is the reality of a lot of teenagers who actually have to take care of their younger brothers and sisters. Like, it's not glamorous. It's something that they have to do. And if they're young, again, when you're young, you make very impulsive, sometimes irresponsible decisions. And if I can weasel and lie my way into a better position that pays better, so I can take care of myself and my younger brothers and sisters, I'm going to do it. I would have done it. So because I think it has those layers. And again, when reviewers are kind of like coming from this, I guess, class privilege position. These things kind of get lost in translation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with you that it's not really like that escapist, because it's really about how and Nicole and I, you and I have passed some notes back and forth about this, but that Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead is kind of about how you'll find your true purpose when you get a job. Like, that is your purpose. Even Metalhead Brother, it's like, it's when he can be a caterer is when he becomes his whole self. So I don't know if it's so much as a consumerist fantasy as it is like I don't know what the word is. I know the word. I just can't think of it right now. But the your job defines you sort of thing. It's like you're not a whole person until you have this career laid out for you, which, if that's not a really, really good sort of encapsulation of how being raised in at least the 90s, if not also the 80s, was in terms of the messaging for kids, that just feels like what my entire childhood was, you got to figure out what your job's going to be, so you know what your purpose in life is. And it honestly kind of feels like the fantasy there is that if you just abandon the kids, they're just gonna they'll just find their true purpose.
Yeah, it's funny because I've talked to enough parents in their 50s who have adult children who have had fantasies of abandoning their children. So I'm just like, oh, okay, so that's not too far off. This is kind of a consistent thing where there's mom burnout or parent burnout, and they're just I wish I could just go away for 3 months and not come back.
The mom's the one who had it the best in this. She got to just go be in Australia for however long she was, had a brief thing where it's uh-oh, what has happened? But then it's oh, everything's actually way better than how I left it. So she's the one. The kids had to actually grow up and, start. And, Kenny didn't end up getting a job, but he did, at first Christina Applegate, or Swell, her character is called, is okay, fine. Well, we're going to flip this pizza to decide who gets a job. Okay, fine. I lost fair and square. I'll go get a job, but then you need to stay home with the kids, which is also very legitimate work. And at first he's yeah, sure, of course. But he just kind of fucks off and doesn't do it. But when his little brother gets injured, he realizes, oh, I was responsible for this kid. And now this kid's leg is broken or whatever. Fuck. And then it kind of hits home. And then he starts developing some responsibility, watching the kids, taking some pride in keeping the house clean, all of that. I don't remember where I was going with that. But that they both have to their arcs are about gaining responsibility, whereas their mom got to just fuck off to Australia and everything went amazing. So point being, if it's an escapist fantasy for anyone, I think it's more parents than kids. But Ebert had passed away by the time Knives and Skin came out, but on his website, Brian Tellerico, I don't know if I said his name right, gave Knives and Skin 1.5 stars, which I was not thrilled about, and said, like the songs sung by its young cast, Knives and Skin feels like cinematic karaoke, lacking in authorship or deeper meaning. The cast, 2 actresses in particular, give it their all, but who he doesn't even name. But it is an aggressively hollow experience. The point that awful boys will become awful men is an interesting one. I don't exactly think that's the point of the movie, but these subplots are underdeveloped. Every time something feels like it's just about to gain thematic traction or narrative weight, Knives and Skin just floats off in another direction altogether. Maybe that's part of the point, the inconsistency of the teenage experience. I feel like that may be giving a half-baked screenplay a bit too much credit. Again, it's a theme of Lynch or Greg Araki to spotlight how adults are no more mature than their teenage children, but Knives and Skin feels like it doesn't understand how to do this past a superficial level. I'm just sorry he couldn't find a way into the film, honestly.
Yeah, it also... I feel like it's one of those examples of where you run into and we talked about this, I think, during the last episode or the last 2 episodes, critics who don't seem to know how to handle it when the movie doesn't follow like a strict either 3-act structure, or which this has, but it also has multiple, like it's not one main character. It's not one protagonist. It is about multiple people. So they're like, this doesn't seem to come together at all. It's like, yeah, they didn't use Save the Cat to write the screenplay.
And I keep bringing this up because I can't help but think because I have watched this with other people who've had similar reactions and clearly are very uncomfortable with it. And I think to myself, and again, because I understand grief on a level I couldn't imagine. So for me, that was the way in, and I think that's kind of a part of the heart of it. I can't say the heart. Maybe I can, maybe I can't, but I don't know. And I think because what grief emotes outwardly makes people very uncomfortable. Even when you tell someone you lost someone, people get uncomfortable. They don't know what to say. They don't know what to do. And this film kind of just gives it to you raw, just kind of shows you exactly how it feels and what it looks like. And I think people are really uncomfortable with that. And I think that's a part of the reason why people, it's all about, let's compare this, because they need to compare it to something. So let's compare it to David Lynch. Now I know Jennifer Reeder is just like, I don't mind, but it just gets kind of like, it gets old because I've read so many reviews on this movie and they're just like, it's always about going back to David Lynch. And I'm like, sure, but there's more going on. She has her own authorship in this, and I really wish people were noticing that. And it's also, Reader also says she is very feminist forward with this film and with this piece as a piece of art. So she's doing a lot more than I think what people want to latch on to and dive deep into, because again, you're right, it isn't necessarily a linear film in the way people understand how to watch movies. So it's really easy to kind of throw it away and to kind of just carbon copy every other review that's been written about it.
Yeah, I strongly agree with everything you just said. I don't know if you saw the notes Sean and I were going back and forth on the doc, but I was joking that we were going to have to do like Knives and Skin review bingo, but just every square is David Lynch. Because it's in every, and I think it's a valid reference point. Yes. I think obviously specifically Twin Peaks with like the Laura Palmer character, it's definitely a valid thing to bring up, but I'm like, she's not doing David Lynch karaoke one at all. No. 2, she's doing, as you said, very different things that David Lynch is not doing. And also, like, it makes me think about the fact that, like, Twin Peaks, the show, was critically hailed when it came out. But Firewalk with Me, the movie, got fucking ripped apart when it came out. And I remember seeing that in the theater and being with, like, some friends. And we were like, we like this. I liked it. And then all the critics are just like, 1 star, this is terrible. But, what's happened in recent years, of course, there's been a reassessment of Firewalk with Me. And now people are like, oh, it was underappreciated at the time because it didn't meet the expectations of what people wanted the Twin Peaks movie to be, I guess. And that movie is a very, I think, relevant point of comparison with Knives and Skin as well. And, it's a totally different story, but in that, as I recall, it's been a long time since I saw it, but Firewalk with Me is all about Laura Palmer, right? Like the show is more analogous to Knives and Skin in terms of it being about Laura Palmer's absence. But the film almost reminds me more of Knives and Skin in terms of like how focused it is on this teenage girl and her story. It's not as focused on like all the other townspeople. And Knives and Skin similarly is very much about like the kids, especially the girls at the school, and then to a degree, their parents, especially their mothers, but also, fathers, other family members, et cetera. And I think there's some point of continuity with David Lynch there, just in terms of like, I don't know, taking teenage girls seriously and really going into some of the messy, unpleasant stuff that can go on with teenage girls, psychologically, emotionally, physically, and everything else. But that's not really what people are talking about. I feel like when critics compare these two films, they're just like, they're both about a missing girl. They're both about a missing blonde girl, and they're both weird, and they both got this kind of heightened tone, and I'm not 100% sure if it's really happening or not. So yeah, you know, reader just ripped off David Lynch as if like, you know, Sean's been pointing to greener grass. Like I think of Safe, Todd Haynes' Safe is a film that I feel like has continuity with it as well. And there's a part of me that like gets annoyed by seeing, and I don't want to like, I don't want to oversimplify this or overgeneralize, but reading a lot of especially male critic after male critic be like, oh, she's just copying David Lynch over and over and over again. There's something about that that really does not sit right with me and makes me think, okay, maybe you were not the right person to review this film. Like, and what's the combination is, if it's like the discomfort with grief, if it's like the inability to be able to like get past the tone, like finding the tone too off-putting, finding certain things that happen. Like some of these reviews, and we don't have to read them all, but would refer to it as having like pointless shock value in it. And I'm like, it is never pointless. All of this shocking things that happen in the film, which first of all, aren't even that shocking beyond that we're just not used to seeing them. How many films?
Yeah, I think I said in my review, just in passing, just briefly, but just I obviously to make a point is that this film, I think I'm trying to go off of what you just said. It's showing you all the things that people do behind doors that you don't know that they're doing.
Yeah. And I think that exactly, and that you don't know that they're doing. It's not just like showing stuff that should be private for a reason. It's revealing something about emotional landscapes. And that's part of why watching it is so uncomfortable, I think, because you're seeing so much intimacy, positive and negative, of all different types. And it's uncomfortable, but it's there for a reason. It's not like it's there to make you uncomfortable and that's it. And the fact that this Brian Tallarico is like, oh, keeps saying shallow, doesn't go deeper, doesn't know what to do with it. I'm like, no, you didn't know how to read it. You know, that's a different thing. If it doesn't resonate with you, if you don't connect to it, that's fine. Not every movie is for everyone. But this movie is obviously for some people and is connecting with the people it's for. And yeah. And yeah.
I mean, I think it's like in our like notes exchange, I was saying, I think that there are sort of just a handful of reference points for it, like, and that people keep referencing Lynch is really less a commentary on the movie, and I think more a commentary on just how homogenous a lot of narrative film is, and how easily a lot of even like independent film just falls into like these very similar sort of tracks and tropes, and like you can like almost like call out like this is the scene where they all give speeches to each other or something like that. I was watching a very low budget indie rom-com a week or two ago that I'd been curious about, and as I was watching it, I was like, oh yeah, this is like a lot of indie, like low budget movies that a lot of us are making with like just whatever we can scrape together, and that it's a rom-com and it has like this like, and we're quirky, and then there's like what is it, not banjo, what's the other thing, ukulele music, and you know, and it just hitting all that. And I think that, you know, in these different silos of film, it gets a narrative film, it gets very homogenous, and when something's not fitting that, people are just like, critics are the ones who shouldn't be having this problem, but people are having a problem with like, okay, but what is this thing? Why isn't it doing the thing that I was expecting it to do?
And maybe I'm just pissed off right now, but honestly, I feel like generally women get less space than men also to do weird shit.
Yes.
I feel
absolutely.
like,
yes.
I feel like if some dude does something, not always, but if some dude that for whatever reason critics are inclined to give any leeway to, does something weird, you know, a good portion of them at least are going to think it's brilliant, even if it's fucking shit, you know, like there's been some terrible fucking strange movies that got some very good reviews. I'm thinking of like James Toback back in the 90s and stuff, like So people made some films that I was like, what the fuck is this? But critics were like, this is amazing. But then Jennifer Reeder does something that's actually like about stuff that we haven't had a film that explores in these ways. And it's real and it's human. And it's not about like pushing people away through shock value. It's really more about what ties us together. It's a very empathetic film, even though it's very strange. And all these critics, and especially the ones we've been quoting so far, are men or people who have names that make me believe they are men, are just like, I didn't get it. But they can't say I don't get it. They have to say, it's got style, but there's nothing there. It's referencing stuff I love because I know I have to love David Lynch because you have to like at least respect David Lynch to be a film reviewer. If you're like, I don't get it, everyone's going to be like, fuck you, buddy, don't review films then. But, you know, you can just shit on this and not many people are going to call you on it.
Absolutely. I think it's an absolutely true observation that women don't get enough room to do the exact same things that guys who are, your example of James Toback, I've only seen one of his movies, and and people had told me like, yeah, he does a good job with stuff, and I watched it. I was like, well, I'm not watching another one of these movies. What the fuck was that?
But you know, he combines scripted with improv and has 1 million celebrities come in and just do whatever, and it's a provocation about like race in America or whatever. But didn't it come out like 5 years ago that James Toback was just like jerking off in front of people all the time?
Yes,
that's right.
Yes, there was a lot about that. There was a lot of stories about that. And I was like, that totally tracks with what I saw in the one movie I watched and would never watch another.
I mean, as far as I was concerned, all his films was jerking off. So it was no surprise at all that, you know, he would extend that into other areas of his life somewhat inappropriately or extremely inappropriately in the, in the actual.
But we're not here to talk about James jerking off Toback, are we? No, we want to talk about the box office and awards for these movies. What were they, Nicole?
Well, as Ashlee, I believe, mentioned before, Don't Tell Mom grossed like 25 million, which is not bad considering that it cost 10 million, but at the time was considered like a flop. Yes. It did go on to like become a bit of a cult classic on cable and VHS. Like people know it now, it's had legs, but at the time it was considered a failure. It was nominated for the MTV Movie Award for Most Desirable Female. That's kind of gross. And also was nominated for the Young Artist Awards for Outstanding Young Ensemble Cast, Best Family Movie, Best Family Motion Picture Comedy, and Best Young Actress co-starring in a movie for Danielle Harris. Otherwise, it was not really nominated for awards. Knives and Skin, I could not find any box office information for, which makes sense because it had a very limited release. When we saw it at IFC, it was like that was the one showing.
It was it basically did a tour. Like it was in specific cities at specific kind of like small, probably art house theaters in whatever city it was in, and then that was it. Like it had like a few weeks of a theatrical run, and then it just went straight to VOD.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I couldn't find stats on that, but it doesn't really make sense to compare the two films in terms of like box office and budget because they're just in completely different worlds in terms of that, you know?
So I do have a sidebar real quick because you mentioned the term cult classic, and I had one of my students ask me. And I think over the course of like 2 class sessions, because it was kind of off the cuff, because I understand what that means, but it was hard for me to articulate like right off the bat. I was able to do a sufficient job that night, but then like the next week, because I thought about it a little bit more, I kind of gave him a little bit more information. But I think how I described it, I kind of broke it down where I kind of said, a cult classic usually means that it's something that kind of reverberates from generation to generation. It's still something people talk about. One of the more active things, it has a fan base. Like there's retrospectives on it. There are written pieces on it. There are actual like screening events and things like that. And I want to know, like, I guess I'm asking you, Sean and Nicole, like, how would you describe a cult classic to someone like an elevator pitch? Like, what would you say to them?
I would probably just rip off exactly what you just said. Because I was thinking as you're saying, I'm like, I don't know how. Yeah, like I know what it is, but I don't know how to define. Yeah, I would say it's a film that's following didn't generate from like initial huge box office success or critical love or tons of awards. It didn't come from initially being like a success financially or in terms of response. I would say it's very often a film that initially had a negative reaction at the box office to some degree and was not widely heralded, but then over the years gained traction. So it's not like one of these films with the like, I don't know, some random action film that grosses like $250 million domestically, but nobody remembers 5 years from now. You know, a cult classic are the ones that grossed like $5 million or whatever. But people saw it on video, people saw it streaming, word of mouth spreads, and slowly over the years, the audience grows instead of shrinks. And just like you said, it's a film that usually, like, there's a fan base around, people feel passionately about it. They keep it alive for years or decades beyond the life of it. That's like a cult classic, like a quote unquote cult kind of develops around the film. That's not really the best use of the word cult, actually, but it's the one that is the label for this kind of film. I don't know, Sean, how you feel.
I actually have a lot of feelings about the term because it gets misused so much, and many people have had to hear me rant about it because I'll see it in reviews for things destined to become a cult classic. It gets used as a marketing term, and I'm like, yeah, you don't get to say that yet. Like it has to fail, like you're saying, it has to fail in the normal terms of like box office, sales, whatever. And then people have to discover it and they have to love it and they have to want to share it with other people. I haven't watched it because what little pieces that I've seen of it, I don't want to see it. The Room, that is definitely a cult classic because that did fail miserably and then like got elevated by people who were like, watch this terrible movie. My model for it has always been Rocky Horror Picture Show, which was a disaster when it came out and then became a thing because of midnight shows and because of people who were like, we have to go watch this. And then they formed a whole like, it's the model for them because like even with The Room, like people kind of now my understanding is they do things just like they do for Rocky Horror screenings where they do all this ridiculous like call and response stuff with the movie and props and things. I've never been to what some people call like a proper viewing of Rocky Horror. I just like to put it on and sit back and enjoy it because I just love that movie and performed parts of it in school way back. But yeah, it has to be a movie that like just wasn't successful and then people discovered it and shared it. I mean, even it's unusual because they're otherwise very popular, but The Big Lebowski from the Coen brothers, I think, is also an example of that. And that's one of my favorite ones of those because it's one of those movies that I didn't think very much of the first time I saw it. And then the second time I saw it, I liked it more. And every time I watch it, I like it more.
I have that experience with that movie too, actually.
Yeah. And I think that's, I mean, yeah, it's a thing that gets misappropriated for marketing so much. They're like, it's a weird movie, so we call it a cult classic. I'm like, you got to have at least a few years of it failing and like wallowing in obscurity first.
Well, the one thing I will say, I think you are correct 99% of the time. I think there are a couple outlier, and perhaps I'm going too deep down this rabbit hole of defining cult classic now, but it's interesting to me. Something like Cats, I think soon will legitimately be able to be called a cult classic.
The movie,
because the movie, because it failed massively. It was like a critical disaster. It did not make back its budget theatrically.
No.
However, the like rehabilitate Cats as a cult classic machinery kicks into gear at such an accelerated rate now, I think, because people know this path. So like Alamo started doing midnight screenings of Cats during its initial theatrical run. I would say I am very happy to say it is too early to call Cats a cult classic. Yeah. However, I would say that in 5 years, if the interest in it continues to like grow and it continues to become its own thing, then it'll make sense to call it that, even though it wasn't obscure. But I think like there is room for like huge budget flops that that. And then the other example would be something like maybe Knives and Skin. But I think of like John Waters movies, where it's not that they didn't meet expectations. There were no expectations. They were films that were designed to be like shown at midnight in local movie houses. And it was like a super DIY endeavor. So it's not coming from failure, but it is coming from like a very grassroots, super low budget DIY approach to filmmaking. Here's a bunch of people. We're just going to like do a bunch of drugs and do whatever like crazy shit we want to film while we're all on acid, and then go four-wall the movie house downtown. And it starts to pick up notoriety. And in that kind of grassroots, organic way, word of mouth spreads with their stoking it, of course. Like there was a marketing campaign around it, but it was a very like low budget marketing campaign. It's not like when you have a studio trying to advertise something. And I think it would be ridiculous to say early John Waters films are not cult classics, but they're outliers in that way. And I think there are some others that are too, like Herschel Gordon Lewis or something like that. Like a lot of these filmmakers.
I think those definitely, like, those smaller movies where they did meet what the expectations were at the time, but they grew beyond those. You know, they grew beyond what, like, the expectation for those John Waters movies is they would get seen and, you know, locally and maybe around a little bit. And then, you know, he would, you know, die alone in his apartment at, you know, in his mid 50s. But that's not what happened because he made a bunch of cult classics. So let's just dive into the
the main discussion question is just like, what do these films reflect about one another? And I would love to hear what Ashlee has to say on this, if you have, you know, additional thoughts beyond what we've already said, which is basically what struck me is, they're both films that are kind of about teenagers having to parent themselves, right? Like they're both kind of films about absentee parents, either physically absent or emotionally absent, and what happens to teenagers in those situations. So do you have like any thoughts on that, Ashlee, or other points of continuity you see between the films? If there's anything we missed or
not extensively. My brain has to do a lot of running around to kind of like do I've never been a compare and contrast kind of person. I've never been good at it. I don't think I've ever been good at it, but I honestly, my response is probably really boring. I think what gets me is the whole coming of age thing. Like, I guess it's something I kind of personally identify with. I'm the oldest of three. And and for a myriad of other reasons, just having to grow up fast. And it's kind of just interesting to see. And I think that's probably why I love both of these movies so much. Not just because I'm doing teen films for the semester, which honestly, I wish I could. I'm kind of doing 80s and 90s with them because those are decades that they didn't exist in, more of them. I think one person was born in 1999, he told me. So,
oh my God.
I know.
You got an older student.
Every time I tell someone my student told me he was born in 1999, they had the same reaction Nicole has. It's really funny. Everyone in our age group. Yeah. But I would love to kind of show them these new ones that they probably wouldn't have seen, especially some of my students who seem really like into, like they like the idea of seeing feminism in film and seeing feminist characters or trying to find the feminism in a movie, especially some of my female identified students, which I think is great. And I think they would enjoy this, but alas, we don't have the time. It's just kind of in the suggestion box on their online portal for how they access the extra work for their classes. But I think just for me, the whole run through is just the coming of age idea. And again, the idea that I think I have something. So I feel like, again, when we talked about how the children or the kids sometimes are kind of more of the parents than the parents actually are. And I think that's I think it's both for both of those films. I think they reveal them obviously in very different ways, but still at the same time, what Knives and Skin and what Jennifer Reeder has said to really nail that in the head is just like, you never stop growing up. Like even to your last breath, you're still evolving. And I think both of the films kind of show that by kind of reversing how responsibility is distributed, where you have the people under 18 kind of taking on more of the responsibility and more of the roles, and the adults are kind of just like, been there, done that. I'm just going to regress to an extent. So
yeah, that actually got me thinking about how another super obvious connection between the two films that I kind of just glossed over in thinking about them is like, you know, they're both about teenagers, and there are both like teenage boys and teenage girls in both films, but they're both films focused on teenage girls. You know, the protagonist of Don't Tell Mom is Swell, and a lot of her journey and her growing up is about navigating a patriarchal world, right? It's about her learning how to deal with the guy at work who's hitting on her, who's also her boss's boyfriend, right? As well as other sorts of like being underestimated, being a little bit like, you know, catcalled, dudes like saying stuff to her and her like having some retort for them and that sort of thing. And also, interestingly, the kind of domestic sphere that's been created in Don't Tell Mom. It's interesting because so there's 3 boys and 2 girls. There's Sue Ellen and her little sister, the Halloween girl,
Melissa,
right? Who's
yeah.
like, yeah, who's like, who's I guess who's a tomboy is what we would have said at least back in the 90s. And she like, you know, isn't into, and like when the babysitter tries to put her, like forces her to put on this like pink frilly dress and this bow, and she's just like, I'm gonna fucking murder you. It's like I felt that. I was like, oh, you know, it's like not, oh, I don't want to dress nice, I want to be a slob. It's like, this is not who I am.
Right.
This doesn't feel okay to me. And I thought that was a little bit of interesting. It's not exactly subtle gender commentary, but it's like kind of a nice thing to just have happening in the dynamics of the household. And meanwhile, it is this kind of like flip of like the 50s suburban fantasy thing in terms of Kenny and Swell having to be the parents as the 2 oldest. And that even though it's because they, you know, flipped a frozen pizza, she's the one who's going to go out and be the breadwinner. He's the one who's going to stay home and watch the kids and cook and clean. And he thrives in that role. Like he absolutely like takes to it, and it gives him this sense of purpose. So one way of looking at it could be like Sean was talking about earlier, finding purpose through, you know, employment, through profession. But, you know, there's another way of looking at it too. And the two don't necessarily contradict each other, which is about him just finding out, oh, I like to do all this stuff that would typically be coded feminine as like feminine labor. And like, oh, this is actually where I feel like myself and can thrive and can be productive. And I think that's interesting. The feminist content in Knives and Skin, I think, is a lot more forward and overt. Yeah. I don't agree with critics who are like, it's about how men are terrible. And I mean, I've had people say that about my own films as well. And I'm like, that's not like, I mean, you're not wrong. Yes, men are terrible. However, that is not what my film is particularly about. Sorry, you missed everything else going on. And same with Jennifer Reeder. Like, yeah, there are some shitty boys in it. Honestly, the adult men who are parents, I think, are not particularly terrible at all. There's the high school, there's the English teacher and the principal who are fucking predators. And they're terrible, but it's not an all men are terrible thing. I think it's in fact extremely empathetic to the high school boys, even to Andy, who's the one who abandoned Caroline to die. And like, he gets his, you know, like he does get his. The movie isn't like, oh, but feel for him too or anything, but he's not a cartoon mustache twirling villain. He's just some dumb teenage boy who didn't know what to do, you know, and it's not, he's one of the less sympathetic characters in the film, but the film isn't unempathetic to him either. So I feel like there's a lot going on here in terms of like layers of, you know, how we're all fucked up and trying to get through. And everyone in the film grows, I think, a little bit, at least. Not like, not in as clear a way as in Don't Tell Mom, where there's like a total makeover transformation. But, you know, I think Andy learned something. You know, and like Renee, who's the parent who was faking a pregnancy, like that gets revealed and she can't continue to live this lie that she was living because it made her feel whatever it is it made her feel. And people do that. Like, that's not a thing Jennifer Reeder made up. People fake pregnancies for like attention, to feel like special, to feel like some kind of control or value or whatever is going on. You know, it's not like, and it pisses me off because I totally have known so many people whose approach to screenwriting is like, what would be a fucked up thing that would get attention? I'm going to put that in there.
Television writers do that. And I'm not even a television writer, but I see it when I watch some TV shows. It's the easiest, lowest common denominator plot device they'll use for, especially for a woman, and it just makes me very angry. But continue, please.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree, and it's so clear to I think all three of us that is so far from what Jennifer Reeder is doing here. But I guess it's kind of like if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Kind of to Sean's point earlier about homogeny, like. People are going to be like, this shocks me. Ergo, it must be like empty shock value, especially because I'm uncomfortable. So now I'm mad. And when viewers get uncomfortable at a film, they often get angry at the film and then try to justify that anger with some bullshit that might have to do with like, no, you just, you know, it was too difficult for you, or you weren't in the right mood, or you're an idiot, or whatever it is, you know, or an asshole, or, you know, a misogynist, or whatever it is, or whatever combination of things are. You know, and again, it's totally fine if someone's like, this isn't my cup of tea. I'm not saying everyone needs to love this movie. I'm saying don't smear it as something that isn't what it is.
Right. Yeah, the empty shock value thing is something that I can't stand when movies get like saddled with that, because I think what ultimately happens for some filmmakers is then that's just what they become. They think, well, everybody just thinks it's empty shock value, so that's all I'm going to do. And I think there's other reasons, but I think that's also one of the reasons why certain middle-aged male filmmakers from Europe have gone from like, they had something, they were doing a lot of shock value stuff, but they had something in early films, and then more recent films, it's just like, well, fuck it, I'm just going to shock you with it because I hate you and you hate me. Sure. Yeah. And it's just not a good thing for critics to be like just dismissing out of hand without actually trying to interact with the piece. Because there's certainly plenty of stuff that is definitely just shock for shock's sake, but this clearly is not.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like Ashlee and I both have spoken at some length about how emotionally impacted we were by this. Like, it's not, you know, oh, that was so interesting. Or like, oh, I'm an edgelord and like, look at, you know, I'm going to watch some, I was reading about Lucifer Valentine for some reason earlier today. You know, it's not like that kind of shit. It's like at all. It's the furthest thing from it. I did want to point out this little bit of a quote from the Berlin review of Knives and Skin, which was like more positive than most of the other reviews, although still critical. And I thought it was interesting that it said, it may feel that Reeder is trying too hard to shock or tickle us at times, but the eccentricity usually touches on the misery behind the adult's behavior. And I'm like, it doesn't just touch on it. It like illuminates it. Like, you need that in this film. That is what this film's about. It's about, like you were saying, Ashlee, these private moments behind closed doors that are sometimes really uncomfortable, like a mother and I remember talking to you about this moment, Ashlee, after I first saw it, like a moment that on first watching, especially, I was like, wait, what the fuck is going on here? Like, the mother goes into her dead, but she doesn't know her daughter's dead, her missing teenage daughter's bedroom, and is like masturbating. And I'm like, is this implying that there was like sexual abuse going on in this relationship? What is the, and eventually I was like, no, this is just about like the messiness of grief and her wanting to feel close to her daughter and wanting to feel something. And that's the same reason why she goes and like hooks up with her with Andy and like takes Andy's shirt. It's not because she's like, I mean, I'm not saying that's a great thing to do. I don't think that's a good thing to do, but she's not doing it because like, you know, I like teenage boys or something like that. It's that she literally smells her daughter, and it's the only way she can feel that like visceral connection to her daughter, even though it's coming out in a really fucked up, disturbing, you know, probably for most audiences off-putting way. And that's one of those, all this stuff with her, when I knew it was going to happen the second time through, I got to much more so be kind of emotionally present with with Carolyn's mom, with Lisa.
Yeah.
That's her name. Yeah. And like Lisa really like just gutted me this time watching it. And it's not about like, do I want to hang out with Lisa? You know, am I going to give her a Mother of the Year award? Like, it's not about any of that. It's about she feels like a real person having an authentic reaction of grief. And that is something we almost never see in film. It's so sanitized. And this film is not sanitized. And I think that's part of the feminism of it.
Yes.
Also.
Yeah. And I guess for me, the thing that's even more cryptic that I haven't really fully, I guess I could think it out and I've thought it out when I've watched it multiple times is like, what's with the knife in the beginning? Like I think people are really off put by not fully understanding what their relationship means. Because also when Joanna, I forget her name, I forget the cheerleader's name. And then Charlotte goes to her house.
Laurel Darlington.
Is it Laurel?
Laurel's the one. She's brought Jesse's her brother.
Yeah.
Her mom's fake pregnant. Her dad's the sheriff.
Yeah.
That one.
I don't know why I thought her name began with a K, but even because she's talking to them about when Carolyn was born, she didn't even want to touch her in the beginning. She's having all of these kind of complicated feelings about motherhood, and she's kind of like, you know, again, word vomiting that out to them because she doesn't know who else to talk to when they're there. So she can use them as kind of like an armrest for all of her kind of all the emotions she's dealing with at this moment. And also, again, connecting that with the knife in the beginning. And yeah, I think people are really just in this uncomfortable, to overuse that word, a shade of gray, because they don't like what is their relationship and not really understanding what that means. And I think also maybe reader is kind of pinpointing this idea that, you know, some women become mothers and don't want to be mothers or don't know what to do with those emotions as well. And again, I fight this probably on a daily basis, feeling the feeling of like not being a mother or motherhood is some kind of pinnacle of being a woman, or all of these things that are kind of like put into your head, and some people are much better at resisting than others, obviously, but like that's also a good thing too. I guess I think I just kind of like that she kind of plays with that a little bit as well. The contentiousness between parents, but also some moms don't want to be moms, even though they are.
Yeah. Or they want to be moms for the wrong reasons. Like too. Renee, who's just like pretending that she's pregnant and like, you know, getting mad at her husband for not being more into her fake pregnancy, which is pretty deep in a lot of ways. I think that's a great point. And that pressure is massive to the degree where even if, you know, like I don't have kids, I'm not going to have kids, but I still constantly am like, am I going to regret this? Because it's so, it's so instilled in you, even if you don't want it, that like, no, but you really do. No, if you don't want it, it's because there's something wrong with you. And when you have enough therapy, you'll want it, but it'll be too late. You know, like there's so much of that. And I do appreciate all of the kind of like ambiguity around motherhood that Jennifer Reeder has in this film, and isn't afraid to have, you know, quote unquote, bad mothers who are still sympathetic. Yes. It's because so often when we have the bad mother, they're the villain. And these women aren't villains. And you've got a lot of, you know, we didn't even talk about Lynn, who is the mother of
Joanna
and Andy. And she's like this dressmaker who can't make dresses anymore because she can't function anymore, basically. And Charlotte, who we mentioned before, who's another character I really love in that movie, is kind of like her apprentice or something, and like helps her make dresses. And like this grown woman is basically relying on this high school girl to keep her dress business 100% going.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because if you get the Blu-ray, I don't know if it's on the DVD, but the Blu-ray, basically the deleted scenes is that like Charlotte, you see her with her mother. So, and it's an interesting dynamic because her mother is deaf. So she understands. Charlotte understands sign language. So it's again, talk about like that hovering above reality thing that Reader is on, because basically her mother's a therapist and her mother sees Lisa and Renee, but Charlotte has to be there to interpret. And I'm just like, there has to be some sort of laws being like bended for this other person to be in this therapy session that's supposed to be confidential. But
and that it's her daughter.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like some professional interpreter or something who, like, signs some kind of NDA and is like, I, you know, basically just function as an interpreter and is super professional about it. It's more of those, like, fucked up blending boundaries and, like, where maybe they should be a little firmer. That I was just thinking I should get the Blu-ray because I saw there were deleted scenes, and I definitely would like to see that.
Yeah, I won't spoil any more for you then. But they're there, and I was delighted because I wasn't sure if that was a thing. But and now I want to ask the Reader why it was cut. Like, I got to meet her in person at Fantastic Fest in the before times. I think the year before like what we have now. So, and I actually just came with a bevy of questions because that was one that I would have liked to have known just why it was cut. Like, there's no confrontation. I'm just curious as to why that particular choice was made. But I am glad that those are scenes that we can see and kind of piece them back into the film and just to think about more.
Yeah.
The one thing I did forget to mention is when I first saw it in the beginning was like the first image I saw was of Charlotte in that scene where she's in the bathroom after the kids had the boys like made her trip and fall. So you see the blood. And again, the synopsis was incredibly vague. I had no idea what it was about, but because everyone says, well, Ashlee's black and she likes black things that are genre-y, so let me send her this image. And so they sent it to me, and again, Ashlee is black and likes black things and likes black women and genre-y things. So I was just like, I need to see this. So that was kind of my first thing. And so Charlotte was like my tunnel vision for a while with this movie. I like all aspects of it, but it's, again, I think it's revolutionary because the other aspect of it, because we didn't touch on romance, which is fine, but there are romance elements with it, with the teenagers kind of exploring who they are, even in relationships and what they want and desire at the time of them being teenagers. But the other thing that not a lot of people are noticing or talking about, and I did tell Reader this, I'm just like, I don't think you understand what you did. You do not see black kids that age, two black kids who are in love with each with each other or developing a love for each other that are dark skinned. You don't see that.
Yeah.
And I was just I still don't know where to put that, because I'm still just like, because you still kind of don't see that, and I'm just like,
which is, I mean, this has always been a problem, and it's, you know, this year of our Lord 2021, and it's like, we know this is a problem. Like, many people have written about this. This isn't some obscure, you know, gap in media, and it's still, and the fact that it's still so like, oh wow, is quite shameful. But I was thinking, as we were talking about Charlotte, also about how there's this an interesting kind of like through the looking glass thing with her and Don't Tell Mom that has to do with kind of a little bit of the gender femininity stuff in both films, about how, like, so Charlotte is like this kind of like goth kind of punk rock girl in a band, you know, and they're trying to decide whether the band's going to be called Beaver Fever or Bride of Blackness, and like she's all, you know, more kind of like goth style basically, but actually she loves the color pink. And like, the other girls don't believe her at first, and she has to show like, no, I'm wearing this like pink lacy bra. And then to a dance towards the end, she wears this like pink lacy dress, and there's a lot of discussion with her and her friends like, oh, one of those pink lacy things. And she's like, what the fuck ever? Like, don't disrespect the pink lacy things, basically. And it's kind of the inverse of in Don't Tell Mom, where they're trying to force this pink femininity onto a girl who's like, no, that's not what I'm about. And then in Knives and Skin, it's about a girl who more, I mean, I'd be projecting onto the Charlotte character, but it seems like part of it is it feels like there's a conflict maybe between like her love of pink and like her persona and like the subculture she's a part of. And so it's like, almost a secret thing at first that then becomes more on the outside as, you know, she's just wearing the dress. And I think the two films pair really nicely together in that way of you get to see kind of two different sides of like how powerful the color pink can be and how like, you know, paired with like, you know, it's not just the color pink, it's like pretty pink dresses basically. And how like you can be strong in a pretty pink dress, like this pressure to like, you know, shut down your what might be considered femininity at least. And, you know, traditional markers of like girliness, you know, that's like a sign of weakness or whatever. And Knives and Skin be like, no, that is something that you can embrace as a part of like your whole self and your power. And then Don't Tell Mom is the side against like coercive gendering and being like, and also though you don't have to.
Yes.
So I think they kind of create a nice little complete picture there in a way.
Yeah. I think one of the other ways that they go together that kind of came to me in our notes back and forth, Nicole, is there's kind of a way to look at these two movies of that Knives and Skin is about the children of the kids and Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead. Because I mean, even just chronologically, that's kind of where actually they might be a little bit old for kids from Don't Tell Mom might be a little bit old for it. But like I feel like there's a certain like continuity between those two films as far as like eventually the teenagers do like get older and have jobs and have kids of their own, and what do the children who were functionally abandoned in their teen years and had to figure out life, how do they navigate being parents? They didn't really like, maybe it's not exactly fair, but I think even in the setup for Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead, they kind of didn't have much parenting. Their mom didn't really try very hard. Like the kids didn't really listen. She just kind of was like, I'm going to Australia. They didn't really
communicate either. Like the fact that she didn't even tell the kids a babysitter was coming until the last minute is kind of wild.
Right. And so then how were they like an iteration of how would people whose model for parenthood was that then deal with having children? They're kind of checked out in a lot of ways and haven't really necessarily like left. I mean, yes, we're all growing up and developing, and I think that's a good point. But I think there's also a certain like I didn't get to actually do the teenage thing the way like, and for these parents, I didn't necessarily do the whole thing because I went and had a job or something like that. And so some of them are still kind of gripped onto. It seemed to me, I mean, the teacher is probably the main example and he's not a parent, but like that sort of being an adult, but life in certain generations.
There's nobody here. No one's here except my parents.
Yeah, exactly. Like they never really were put in, like they never really got to be younger. Or they never really got to have a real transition. It was just kind of like, okay, now you have a job and now you're taking care of things, etc. And the parents aren't really there to model for you like adulthood and responsibility. Because I think definitely the kids in Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead had to solve it, and you know, with in other ways and find other models because they weren't modeled by their parent. Their parent didn't model adulthood or responsibility for them. And so how do they raise kids?
You could do a kind of bleak double feature of Don't Tell Mom first and then Knives and Skin afterwards. And, you know, introduce it like that. And that might be a little bit of a rough way to approach these films, but it is.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a clean thing, but it's definitely something that I saw because I don't know. I just my various social media feeds have had more commentary. It comes and goes recently. Gen X and Xennials, or however that's supposed to be pronounced, but people my age.
Because I always say elder millennials because I don't know. Because you're right. Because there's a blur. Because there are millennials I do not identify with at all, especially the ones born in the 90s.
Yeah,
I'm just like
same.
I don't know y'all.
I don't know. Yeah, exactly. There's a big difference between my siblings and myself. I was born in 83 and they were born in 89 and 90. Yeah, the context is really different. The understanding is different. The responsibility is different. Like you said, I am also the oldest of 3. And one of the things that I started to realize and came to terms more with in the last couple of years is that I had just a very different experience growing up than my brother and sister did, partly because of our age difference, but also because I was responsible for them. Not that I was good at it, but I was responsible for them for several years when I was pretty young. Like, my parents had jobs and they had school and they had things, and, you know, that was all good and important. But as a kid, like, I was having to take responsibility poorly, but I had to take responsibility relatively early.
Me and my friend, we've been friends since we were 13. So since we started high school together. And again, her partner was in our graduating class, and they just had a son like almost 2 years ago now. And so it's interesting, like, what I'm seeing with them. I feel like what they're doing is kind of what I would do if I become a parent. That's still not definitive yes or definitive no for me, because I do like when kids go home. I'm still on that wavelength as well. But I feel like they're doing, again, you're right. So they're doing similar to what our parents, because I think our parents, the 3 of us, have similar parents. You know, they were baby boomers and they had strict ways of doing things. You're going to have technology available, but also there's a limit. I'm going to expose you to different types of things as far as education and fun and leisure, and go out and play, be responsible. There's not, we didn't have helicopter parents, so we probably won't be.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's how I feel like they're doing. They're very like attentive, but also not like over the top about it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. That whole helicopter parents thing, like, I don't know, like, I remember times when I was like, even in like high school or whatever, and I went to, and Nicole and I've talked about this, like an alternative school, and there was like an expectation in that school that parents were supposed to like volunteer time, and both of my parents' responses were, I got a job. They're like, both of them, like, my dad's like, I'm not, no. What are they going to do? And mom's like, I have a job. I'm busy. You know what else isn't a helicopter? Is that we should maybe take an ad break and do some wrap up, because you can't wrap up a helicopter. It just there's the blades, they don't lend themselves to the wrapping. So we'll take a quick break for an advertisement, and then we'll be right back to just wrap things up.
Sean, we need to tell people about our Patreon.
I don't feel like it.
Why not? Why would we make one if we didn't want people to see it?
I just think they'll be overwhelmed.
Well, there is a lot of content on our Patreon.
Nicole? A lot of content? We have behind-the-scenes materials, early access to our short films, music videos, and podcasts, updates on current and future projects, video production and social media management training materials, a serialized sci-fi novel, personal writings, access to our award-winning films, small talk and meme, and other exclusive subscriber content. That's not even to mention all the other ideas we have.
Okay, maybe it is a lot.
And it all starts at just $2 a month. How much can people really handle at just $2 per month? And we update weekly. Weekly, Nicole.
Yeah, maybe it's too much to talk about now.
If they really feel motivated, I think it would be great for them to check out patreon.com/4milescircus and subscribe. There's even public posts available so they can get a taste for what we offer. But again, how much can people handle for as little as $2 a month?
I guess they'll just have to decide for themselves by going to patreon.com/4milescircus.
Yes, patreon.com/4, the word mile as in the distance, and circus as in where all the clowns are. All one word, no dashes or underscores.
There is just so much to be seen at patreon.com/4MileCircus.
I'm so overwhelmed thinking about it, I'm going to cry.
That was
I feel educated.
That was important information. I just really feel like we did our part with that. Yeah. And listeners who don't subscribe to our Patreon, you missed some really crucial information that Ashlee and I shared. And so if you would like to subscribe at or at patreon.com/4MileCircus, you can find out what it was.
You can.
But for now, what are we daring to do? We're daring to wrap up. That was Knives and Skin and Don't Tell Mom. And I mean, we could keep talking about these, I think, but we have talked for 2 hours, more than 2 hours. So I think we can wrap it up. What questions do we have for listeners, Sean? Because I didn't write any.
I think I would really like to hear what listeners think about what we were talking about these movies and the relationship between parents and children, especially like in relationship to one another if they have seen both. But I would love to hear more about what anybody who's seen Knives and Skin has to say about honestly, like the critical and our reactions to it. I'm curious about their reactions and if they agree with us or if they're wrong. What other films not listing David Lynch might they have thought of while they were watching it? Like who else are we missing? Because I feel like those would be good recommendations for other films.
I have one I want to say, and I think I got it from you, Ashlee. I think on your podcast you said this, but I could be wrong. So maybe I heard it someplace else, but I remember somewhere coming across someone pointing out Repo Man, which I think is a really, just in terms of like the glowing objects.
Yeah.
And what that's about. Like not in terms of plot or anything, but in terms of like that being maybe it wasn't your podcast where I heard it then, but I was like, that's really true. And I think that, and I'm not seeing that get talked about a lot though. What other films, not like, did she do karaoke of, but what other films do you think are reference points for Knives and Skin so we can crowdsource some references since critics don't seem to be able to do that? Like, think of them.
My review of Knives and Skin is stellar. I know it's kind of like, it's poetic more than anything else. It's not very, and it's beyond objective, if that's a thing you could put on it. But yeah, I mean, I wrote a thing that I want to make a bigger thing.
Ooh, I would like that. I remember reading your review at the time. We'll link it in the show notes so
people can see a good review. Yeah. Not a review that is saying that it's good, but a review that in and of itself is good.
Yeah. Any other questions for listeners?
Why and how dare they?
As always, evergreen questions. Ashlee, where can people find you that you would like them to find you?
I'm glad you asked that question so specifically. Please find me on Twitter at Ashlee Takes Note.
Fantastic. Ashlee is an excellent follow on Twitter.
Yes.
You should follow her there. And Sean, where can people find us?
They can find us 4milescircus.com, at 4milescircus on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Wait, no, don't go to Facebook.
Fuck Facebook.
Don't go to Facebook. I just like, it was like an automatic thing. I hate Facebook. Yeah, Twitter, Instagram, come find us at 4milescircus. You can email us info@4milescircus.com. You can find the show at anchor.fm/the Celluloid Mirror. And if you happen to go to anchor.fm/the Celluloid Mirror, there's a little button where you can leave us a voicemail if you want to respond to any of our questions or leave a rude message or just say something that has nothing to do with anything.
Or you could say something that you might want to have on the show that might add to the conversation. That is also an option.
Well, yeah. Maybe, I guess.
Sing us a song that you wrote about the show.
Oh, I would really like a song.
Read us
I really
a
like
poem
a song.
you composed about. No, I want it, and I'm going to make you listen to it.
Nope.
And then we'll do a special Patreon-only episode where we fight about it.
Poetry makes me uncomfortable because it makes me feel human.
I know.
And I would say now would be a great time to do it, as this is our last episode of the show for now. Now we're coming back. We're coming back and doing more, but this is the end of our first season. Going out strong with Ashlee. So it'll be a little while before we have another episode. But we already have many plans for more, and many. We have a whole
spreadsheet.
Just spreadsheet of so many things. It's hard to pick. But we're making plans. We're listening back to what we've done and how we can improve and how we can modify things. And it's going to be very exciting.
Give us ratings, give us reviews, even negative reviews of the podcast. That's fine. Email us, let us know what you think about the show. The show next season will be basically the same format, but we are giving some thought into exactly what we want to do, which films, whether to have guests or not on each episode, who to have when we do, all that kind of stuff. So feedback, we'll take it. Feedback, we'll take it.
And if you join the Patreon, you get to vote on which guest that we don't poison.
How can you miss out on that? You could save lives.
Just saying. Well, one
life. So anyway, this has been a great first season. Thank you, Sean, for doing this podcast with me. Thank you, Ashlee, for giving us so much of your time.
I feel so undeserving of a finale, but sure.
We specifically were months ago, we're let's have Ashlee for the last episode. We know that's going to be a solid episode. Let's do that. So, and you have not disappointed. So little do you know.
In fact, I'm pretty sure almost from the first episode, we were we should have Ashlee on. We should have Ashlee as the last episode of the season from the first. We did our first episode, and then that's when we were planning. So it's all been planned.
Thank you for blessing us with your specific expertise. You were the perfect person to talk about these films with.
Absolutely.
But listeners, goodbye.
Thank you all for joining us. Bye-bye.
I ended up in that hall of mirrors. There was another girl.
Can you come with me in my dreams?
That'll do, babe. What happens when the story dies and the evil is set free?